Afternoon. Pleasure to be here. First, I'd like to start with a brief introduction about what we do, about us. Essentially, Greenville City's mission is to help build more sustainable cities and projects worldwide by basically providing a framework which focuses on cost-effective solutions. And our think tank is essentially a global alliance of business leaders and experts involved in creating sustainable projects, and altogether probably around 120 countries around the world. Our framework essentially integrates environmental, social, and economic considerations to help make a city more sustainable, or a large project more sustainable, and adds significant value and minimizes the risks involved. And we also play a role in helping introduce experts and companies to specific projects to help them become more sustainable. A little bit about what we've done. We've obviously organized a lot of project tours around the world to help show people how cities or projects can be a lot more sustainable. We're also in the steering committee of the UN Habitat's World Urban Campaign, where we participate in initiatives, ideas on resource allocations and things like that. And we received quite a few awards from different governments in regards to what we've done, and participate in many of the most important meetings and forums in the world in sharing our ideas. And also every year we support maybe 8 or 9 major meetings, and also we do maybe 2 or 3 of our own, where we bring together political and business leaders to share ideas and also start new initiatives and projects. And in the past 10 years, we had a privilege to not only share our ideas with a lot of political leaders, including a lot of world leaders, but also a lot of top business leaders around the world. And I like this little cartoon, comic. But you can actually look at it from a few different ways. One way of looking at it is essentially, with climate change, for example, going green doesn't only address the issues of climate change. It actually gives so many other benefits that sometimes people forget. It's about energy independence. It's about preserving the rainforests that we have. And as you know, rainforests, especially the tropical areas, is disappearing at an exponential rate. It's about creating more green jobs. It's about creating livable cities, about clean air, clean water, and also healthier future generations. And today, obviously, I won't cover too much on geospatial information. I'll just briefly go through other considerations to think about when you're creating future cities, smarter cities, greener cities. One is obviously sustainable land use, better land use policy, eco-master planning. There's so many areas to cover here, about creating more green space, and also, obviously, how to preserve the biodiversity that we have. Great examples in Singapore, the Gardens by the Bay, where they educate people on the importance of rainforests and biodiversity. For example, this other example is in Korea, where building public green spaces on rooftops and connecting them. Second consideration, eco-buildings, green buildings, better green building rating tools, design guides, industry education, building information modeling, BIM, sitting and structural design efficiency, material sustainability, resource efficiency, and renewable resource. And one thing that's very important too is energy efficiency. And there are many buildings around the world now adapting all this in terms of use of passive energy and so forth. About water efficiency, water reuse, and also water creation. Improving indoor environmental quality, IEQ, operations and maintenance, and also construction and operational waste minimization. One thing that's coming into place is obviously modular building construction, where, you know, you probably, most of you, probably some of you have seen the video from the Broad Group, based in Hunan province, where they put up a building, a 55-story building in 3 weeks. The reason why they can actually do something like that is everything's built in the factory, precisely, and all you need to do is just put it up. So imagine building a skyscraper in a couple of weeks, and that's the way of the future, because not only it's faster, I mean, that's one thing, but also it cuts down on waste by sometimes up to 90%. And also improving healthy environments, reducing the toxics and VOCs that we have. Renewable energy and energy efficiency, optimizing the overall percentage of renewable energy that's being used across all sectors. Obviously, it minimizes the CO2 emissions, and one thing that's very important too to consider, obviously, is the smart grid technologies that's coming to place. One thing about renewable energy, and it's a report done just by the IEA, that's very significant, actually, I think. If we transit towards a renewable energy, essentially, we will be making savings of $71 trillion. $71 trillion by 2050. That's not billion, trillion. But why are we not doing that? I think a lot of it is actually the power of lobbyists. In the US, for example, the top 200 companies, the top 200 most politically active companies in the US spend $5.8 billion in lobbying and so forth. But they actually get back 4 point something trillion back in return. That's a return of 750 times of what they put in. And that's why they're lobbying, because they get a lot back in return. And IMF just recently came out with a report, a very significant report too. Fossil fuel industry is being subsidized, estimated this year alone, 2015 alone, by the tune of $5.3 trillion. Not billion, trillion. Yeah, that's $10 million a minute. $10 million a minute that they're getting. Yeah, so obviously, you know, going green is one thing. Everyone wants to go green, but we are faced with a lot of opposition and a lot of misinformation. And, you know, great examples is happening around the world. You know, Australia was the first country to actually create supercritical stream that rivals fossil fuel. In Germany, for example, there's I can't even pronounce it, Solarsiedlung. Oh, this is any German here. Yeah, it's called Solar Village, where they are actually producing 4 times more energy than they actually consume. Yeah? So there's a lot of great examples around the world that's happening. For example, China alone, China is faced with a lot of challenges, but every year, China is actually investing in renewable energy what Australia needs to be in becoming 100% renewable in terms of our energy generation. So when you talk about the target, not being able to reach whatever percent, you know, 20% or whatever, I think that's a bit of well, an excuse, essentially, because China is doing that every single year. You know, imagine if we do that, we'll be 100% renewable. Yeah. And a bit of good news, you know, almost 70% of the world's solar capacity has been installed in the past few years. Clean air is very important and a very significant component of a better future city. Not only in terms of reducing carbon emissions, obviously, it's about reducing nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, VOCs, particulate matters, and air toxics. most of you probably know, a couple of years ago, out of the top 20 most polluted cities in terms of air quality, out of the top 20, 16 of them were in China, just a few years ago. This year, out of the top 20, none in China. Not because Chinese cities, especially not clean, they're not. It's because other cities have surpassed them. India, for example, this year, out of the top 20, 13 cities are in India. And if you include the Indian subcontinent, which includes Pakistan and Bangladesh, 18 out of the top 20 cities is in the Indian subcontinent. So with Prime Minister Modi pushing the doubling use of coal, I think that's going to create very dramatic results in terms of air quality, quite severe results. But that's the price you pay to urbanize. I mean, we are practical people. You know, you've got to balance everything in terms of social needs, economic needs, and environmental needs. And it's not only in China and India, even in Europe, in EU, it's estimated it costs EU countries $1.6 trillion a year in terms of early deaths and disease. Yeah, and that's by the WHO. Water management, very big issue too. It's about creating a better water sustainability policy and so forth, management regimes, better water quality benchmarks, and also wastewater treatment and reuse. And you know, this topic it's a separate conference by itself, essentially. And also water recycling. I think that's a good example. Probably the Deutsche Bank building in Frankfurt is a very good example where they actually use a lot of the waste, recycle a lot of water that they use. Waste management, creating an integrated waste collection, resource recovery, reuse, and disposal policy, and also the management regimes. And one thing I'd like to quickly touch on, is industrial ecology. And that's coming into place in a lot of industrial areas around the world, hopefully. Not as quick as we want it to be. But for example, in Denmark, the waste product of one factory becomes the raw material of another factory around it. And that's how we should design our business parks and our industrial parks, where waste becomes the raw material of another. Better sanitation and health, you know, an integrated sanitation, waste, and water management policy, and also population access. And in many countries, and bear in mind, there's a difference between availability and accessibility. Even in many poor countries, quality healthcare is available, but it's not accessible to a big majority of the population. And one thing I really like is this little chart here. It's where community needs coincide with environmental needs, you get livability. Where environmental considerations coincide with economy, you get viability. And where the economy coincide with community, you get equity. It's only when the three actually combine, you actually get true sustainability. Environmental management, very important too. Integrating development planning and environmental protection policies, and creating and implementing a management regime that includes stakeholder and public participation. And I like this quote from John Sawhill, the former CEO of TNC. Society is defined by not only what it creates, but what it refuses to destroy. And it's actually not a unique way of thinking, or not really, the idea actually didn't come from him. I could remember the great Indian Buddhist emperor, Ashoka, actually said the same thing more than 2,000 years ago. And he obviously not only said this, but he also implemented you know, the freedom of slaves, animal hospitals, and things like that. So a lot of this so-called, what we think of as advanced thinking, actually happened a long time ago in many societies. Green transportation, an integrated urban transport policy management regime, and realized outcome including green mass public transport, electric vehicles coming into place quite fast in some areas, traffic congestion reduction, and so forth, and other things that we haven't even touched on, which, you know, like skyways, cable cars connecting different parts of towns. That's happening too. And lastly, I mean, no matter what we do, we have to be economically viable. That's the bottom line. Because you can't convince, it's hard to convince political people, business people otherwise. Yep. And new ways to create green investment policies, green leases, and things like that. Yep, and what we do, essentially, we help provide a framework, share with people, decision makers a better framework, introduce experts who can help them in specific areas, might be able to introduce sometimes advanced green technologies. And all this will obviously help a certain project or cities attract more investments. And help them in terms of international recognition a little bit. And this is a quote that we like. I won't read it. I'll just let you guys read it. And imagine if everyone was this passionate about things that actually matter. Not that sports doesn't matter. Sports is very important too. Yeah. And yeah, think outside. No box required.